Most games give you monsters to kill. The Witcher gives you monsters with histories, with territories, with reasons for existing that trace back to human violence, human grief, human guilt, and a cosmic event thousands of years ago that filled the world with things that were never supposed to be here. Tonight we are going through all of them, from the ghouls that follow armies eating the dead, to the wraiths that form from broken weddings and betrayal, to the things in the deep forest that predate human civilization entirely. Part 1. Monsters after the conjunction. The bestiary of the continent is fundamentally defined by the conjunction of the spheres. This was a massive cataclysm that occurred roughly 1,500 years ago, temporarily shattering the physical boundaries between multiple parallel universes. This cosmic collision flooded a world previously populated only by elves, dwarves, and gnomes with completely alien biological life forms. These post-conjunction entities introduced entirely different physics, reproductive cycles, and metaphysical architectures to the native ecosystem. These entities are completely unaligned with human morality. They exist as invasive species that do not operate on concepts of malice or cruelty. They view human settlements merely as a dense, accessible harvest of raw biomass and emotional trauma. The environment of the continent was forced to adapt to predators that did not evolve within the natural order of the world. Their presence turned every forest, swamp, and mountain pass into a permanent hazard for the native races. The internal physics of these creatures often rely on magical elements that entered the world during the same cataclysm. They draw power from the lingering residue of the collision, anchoring their physical forms to specific territorial parameters. A monster does not wander out of its zone without an ecological cause, such as a shortage of prey or an increase in regional rot. They are bound to the landscape by biological needs that human scholars frequently misunderstand as supernatural curses. The human colonization of the North was shaped by the constant pressure of these extra-dimensional predators. Settlements had to be fortified with heavy palisades, and trade routes required military escorts just to survive the transit between towns. The common folk quickly realized that the laws of nature had been rewritten by the conjunction, leaving behind a world where humanity was no longer at the top of the food chain. The landscape became a shared graveyard where the living were forced to coexist with things that did not belong to their reality. Part 2. Why witches exist. The introduction of these post-conjunction predators fundamentally disrupted the human expansion across the continent. Ordinary infantries, city guards, and traditional steel weapons proved entirely obsolete against hyper-regenerative tissue. Ethereal phantoms and airborne draconids. A regular soldier could not parry a strike from a griffin or track the movement of a Noonwraith in the fields. To prevent absolute demographic extinction, the earliest human sorcerers realized they needed to engineer a specialized solution to this ecological crisis. The mages created the Order of Witches through the development of the Trial of the Grasses. This was a brutal process of chemical, mutagenic, and alchemical reconstruction that broke down a child's body to rebuild it from the cellular level. The survival rate was never high, but those who endured the torture emerged as an elite caste of professional hunters. The mutations granted them cat-like eyes that could see in total darkness, accelerated nervous systems, and complete immunity to the common plagues of the land. A witcher's work is structured around two distinct blades carried on his back. The steel sword is reserved for terrestrial humans and natural beasts that belong to this sphere, while the highly conductive silver sword is designed specifically to break the magical matrix of post-conjunction monsters. Silver is lethal to creatures born from the cataclysm, disrupting their regeneration and forcing their ethereal forms into a tangible state where physical damage can be inflicted. These tools turn the mutant into the thin line between civilization and extinction. This specialized caste operates on a strictly commercial framework, trading their lethal skills for scraps of coin or regional provisions. They don't serve a specific king or fight for a political cause, walking the path as neutral contractors who only care about the mechanics of the hunt. The profession has entered a long decline, as the secrets of the mutations have been lost and no new witches are being created. The remaining hunters are relics of a previous era, wandering a world that still needs their silver swords, but resents the mutations that made them. Part 3. The Bestiary Mindset. A genuine Witcher doesn't approach a hunt like a reckless sellsword or a mindless brawler. They operate with the analytical detachment of a forensic biologist who views a monster as a problem to be solved through study and preparation. Geralt of Rivia recognizes that every creature is bound by strict ecological laws, territorial parameters, and distinct anatomical vulnerabilities. A successful contract requires a rigorous preliminary investigation before the silver blade is ever drawn from its scabbard. The hunt begins with a collection of data from the surrounding environment. The Witcher questions eyewitnesses, sifts through local rumors, and examines physical signs left behind at the scene of an attack. He analyzes claw depth on trees, bite patterns on carcasses, and the specific scent of secretions in the mud to identify the exact species of the predator. This forensic work eliminates the folklore of the peasantry, replacing village ghost stories with the cold reality of a bestiary entry. Alchemical preparation is the element that determines the outcome of any fight on the path. Once the target is identified, the Witcher compounds specialized oils to coat his blades, increasing the damage inflicted upon specific tissue groups. He ingests toxic decoctions and potions that push his mutated biology past its standard limits, granting him temporary advantages like faster healing or increased resistance to venom. He also constructs tactical bombs designed to disrupt a creature's vision or force a phantom to remain visible. This methodical mindset turns the combat into a mechanical execution of a plan. The Witcher knows when to dodge, which sign to cast to disrupt a monster's momentum, and when to exploit a gap in its defenses. He doesn't look for glory or a dramatic victory, focused entirely on executing the contract with the maximum efficiency. The Bestiary is his manual for survival, a collection of hard-won knowledge that allows a lone mutant to enter the dark places of the continent and come back out alive. Part 4. Men can be worse than monsters. The philosophical core of the Bestiary lies in its constant subversion of traditional fantasy heroism. The lore continuously blurs the boundary line between monstrous creatures and human civilization, forcing Geralt to confront the reality that the silver sword is not always pointed at the true villain of a contract. While beasts like griffins or ghouls kill purely out of base biological hunger or territorial defense, the humans of the continent frequently execute acts of calculated cruelty driven by pure malice. A monster doesn't lie, betray its pack, or launch a systemic genocide against another species to secure a political throne. A ghoul follows the scent of rot because its biology demands dead protein, operating as a simple scavenger within the ecosystem. Humans, elves, and kings, however, build elaborate institutions to justify the torture and displacement of their own kind. They turn their resourcefulness into a weapon, creating miseries that the bestiary cannot categorize. Geralt is continuously caught in a profound moral paradox while walking the path. He is legally contracted to slaughter the beasts that terrorize the villages, yet he frequently discovers that the creature was birthed or provoked by a human sin. A domestic execution, a broken wedding, or a hidden crime can trigger a magical reaction in the soil, summoning a specter or a cursed entity that targets the community. In these scenarios, the monster is merely the symptom of a human rot. This moral grey area shapes the Witcher's cynicism, making him reluctant to accept the definitions of good and evil provided by his employers. He's learnt that a crown can hide a monster far more dangerous than any beast living in the Velen swamps. He executes his contracts with a weary detachment, knowing that when he pockets his coin and rides out of a village, the true source of the cruelty usually remains behind, sitting in a tavern or ruling from a stone castle. Part 5. Ghouls. The basic ghoul is a direct biological consequence of human warfare and societal decay. Classified as low-tier necrophages, these hairless scavengers are the first entities to emerge when the rule of law collapses in a province. They don't hunt in the deep wilderness, choosing instead to follow the movements of armies and the paths of plagues. Wherever humans leave behind their dead without a proper burial, the ghouls will eventually arrive to claim the biomass. Anatomically, these quadrupedal predators are engineered for efficient consumption. They possess incredibly powerful jaw structures capable of crushing human bone to access the marrow, and elongated claws designed for digging through topsoil to reach buried coffins. They move with a frantic velocity, running on all fours and leaping across long distances to close the gap on an intruder. Their hides are tough, grey, and completely free of hair. A physical adaptation that suits their subterranean lifestyle. The massive battlefields of the Third Northern War act as an extensive feeding ground for these creatures. The blood-soaked mud of Velen is choked with thousands of shallow graves, drawing ghouls out of their deep burrows in massive packs. They are entirely blind to the politics of the war, treating fallen Nilfgaardian heavy cavalry and Temerian guerrilla fighters as identical sources of protein. Their presence transforms human combat zones into permanent ecological feeding grounds. A Witcher handles a ghoul pack by utilizing high-speed sword styles and silver steel. Because they hunt in groups, a solitary traveler can easily be overrun by their coordinated leaps and snaps. Geralt uses necrophage oil to ensure his strikes cut through their tough hides, and deploys Igni signs to exploit their natural fear of fire. They are simple animals driven by a permanent hunger, but their abundance makes them one of the most consistent hazards on the broken roads of the continent. Part 6. Alghouls. When a ghoul pack thrives on a constant supply of concentrated human carrion. Specific elder specimens undergo a dark evolutionary mutation. These older individuals transform into Alghouls, a significantly more dangerous tier of necrophage. They do not share the purely animalistic cowardice of their smaller brothers, exhibiting a rudimentary form of tactical intelligence that makes them the natural alpha leaders of a feeding ground. They represent the adaptation of the Bestiary to prolonged violence. An Alghoul is noticeably larger than a common ghoul, standing with a more upright posture and possessing a darker hide that looks like weathered leather. Their skeletal structure is denser, allowing them to absorb heavy physical trauma without losing their momentum in a fight. Their teeth are longer, designed to tear fresh flesh rather than just scrape old bones. They move with a calculated deliberation, letting the smaller ghouls test a hunter's defenses before launching their own assault. The most dangerous adaptation of the Alghoul is its ability to extend a row of sharp spines along its back. When threatened or cornered, the creature supercharges its nervous system, forcing these calcified needles to erupt through its hide. These spines deflect standard sword strikes and deliver a paralyzing poison to anyone who makes physical contact. This defensive mechanism forces a Witcher to alter his tactics, as a direct strike will only damage his own blade. To handle an Alghoul, Geralt must use the Axii sign to stun the creature's mind. The magical influence forces its nervous system to relax, causing the calcified spines to retract into the hide and opening a gap for the silver sword. Furthermore, their presence alters the behavior of the entire pack. Their guttural battle cries actively supercharge nearby ghouls into a blood-drunk frenzy. Eliminating the Alghoul is the only way to break the pack's coordination and restore safety to a desecrated graveyard. Part 7. Drowners. Drowners are the most common aquatic necrophages plaguing the rivers, swamps, and coastlines of the continent. Emerging from the stagnant waters of places like No Man's Land, these bipedal humanoids are a constant menace to fishermen and travelling merchants. They don't belong to the native ecosystem of the world, having entered the waterways during the conjunction of the spheres. Their abundance has turned every shoreline into a potential combat zone for a Witcher. A drowner's anatomy is completely adapted to an amphibious lifestyle. They possess a slimy, blue-green skin that retains moisture when they leave the riverbanks, webbed digits for fast swimming, and mutated gills that allow them to stay submerged for hours. They secrete a distinct odour of stagnant water and rotting vegetation, a sensory warning that often precedes an ambush. They are fast on land, but completely dominant inside their aquatic territory, moving through the weeds with a silent velocity. Persistent peasant folklore claims that drowners are the literal reincarnated souls of wicked men who drowned while intoxicated. Witches recognize this belief as a misleading superstition born from public fear. A drowner is simply a post-conjunction animal, driven entirely by pack instinct and a hunger for decomposing tissue. They do not possess a soul or a memory of a human life, operating on the same level of basic awareness as a wild dog or a marsh rat. These predators lie in wait just beneath the water's surface, tracking the vibrations of feet along the shoreline. They lunge forward in small groups, using their long claws to inflict deep lacerations and drag their victims into the depths to suffocate. Once the prey is drowned, they leave the body to soften in the mud until the flesh becomes soft enough to consume easily. Geralt clears these shorelines by applying necrophage oil and using the igni-sign to boil the moisture on their slimy skin. Part 8. Drowned Dead and Mucknixers. The aquatic necrophage family branches into significantly more lethal regional variations based on environmental toxicity and the concentration of decay, in places where the water is completely stagnant and choked with war wreckage. The basic drowner mutates into an alpha-tier specimen known as a drowned dead. These creatures are noticeably larger, their bodies bloated with the gases of decomposition, and their hides a pale colour that mirrors a waterlogged corpse. They possess a physical resilience that common drowners lack. The drowned dead carry a toxic slime coat that causes an immediate infection upon skin contact. A single scratch from their calcified claws can introduce a necrotoxic poison into a soldier's bloodstream, causing rapid tissue necrosis and systemic failure. They hunt in the deepest corners of the Velen marshes, where the mud is black and the water doesn't move. Their presence indicates an ecosystem that has been completely unhinged by the volume of human slaughter left behind by the armies. Mucknixers represent a secondary variation found primarily within the subterranean sewer networks of large metropolises like Novigrad. These predators have adapted to the dark, filthy environment of municipal waste. Their senses are tuned to the vibrations of stone tunnels. They are thinner, faster, and more aggressive than their swamp cousins. Their claws engineered to grip wet brickwork while they stalk maintenance workers or smugglers. They hunt in highly coordinated packs that can trap a target in a narrow tunnel. Hunting these advanced variations requires Geralt to use specialized alchemical preparation. He must pre-dose his system with golden oriole to neutralize their infections and coat his silver blade with advanced necrophage oil. He uses the Ard sign to blow back their coordinated rushes, breaking their momentum before executing a series of precise sword strikes. These creatures turn the dark waterways of the continent into industrial hazards, proving that human waste always breeds a monstrous reaction. Part 9. Rotfiends and Devourers. Rotfiends and their elder variants, Devourers, represent a walking alchemical nightmare of decay and gaseous instability. These necrophages resemble hairless human bodies that have been completely hollowed out and filled with the volatile products of decomposition. They are driven by a permanent, frantic hunger for rotting tissue, moving through battlefields and abandoned settlements in small groups to harvest the remains of the dead. Their presence is a sensory assault of stench and wet gurgles. The anatomy of a Rotfiend is defined by its translucent skin, which is stretched tight over a bloated torso. Their internal cavities are filled with highly concentrated putrefaction gases, bile, and corrosive compounds accumulated from their diet. They move with an erratic, jerking gait, their long limbs allowing them to sprint across open fields with a surprising speed. They are aggressive but fragile, their bone density reduced by the internal rot that fills their bodies. When a Witcher inflicts severe physical trauma upon a Rotfiend, reducing its vitality to a critical threshold, the creature's internal organs undergo an immediate chemical reaction. The putrefaction gases rapidly expand, causing the Rotfiend to detonate like an organic fragmentation bomb. The explosion sprays high-velocity bone shards, boiling blood, and necrotoxic bile across a wide radius. This discharge can easily liquefy human flesh and ignite secondary explosions if nearby Rotfiends are caught in the blast. Devourers are the elder tier of this family, possessing a darker hide and an even greater gaseous instability. A devourer will actively run toward a hunter when its life is failing, intending to use its own destruction as a weapon to take its enemy down. Geralt handles these walking mines by timing his sword strikes carefully, backing away from the target the moment its skin begins to pulsate and glow. He uses the Quen shield to absorb the blast, or fires a crossbow bolt from a safe distance to trigger the detonation early. Part 10. Grave Hags. Residing exclusively in long abandoned parish cemeteries, forgotten crypts, and mass wartime burial trenches. The grave hag is one of the most intellectually disturbing necrophages in the bestiary. She appears as a withered crone with elongated fingers and a hunched spine. Her features a mockery of human old age. Unlike the simple ghouls that hunt out of a base animal hunger, the grave hag possesses a twisted form of low-level intelligence that makes her a calculated predator of the dead. The primary tool of the grave hag is her hyper-extended, prehensile tongue, which is coated in a paralyzing necrotoxin. She uses this tongue to gather alchemical residue from decomposing marrow and to strike at the eyes of anyone who enters her territory. Her long claws are engineered for the mechanical desecration of graves, allowing her to dig up a coffin minutes after a funeral concludes. She sorts the bones within her lair with an absolute efficiency, breaking them down to extract the juices. This entity actively stalks mourning relatives, watching from the shadows of the cemetery trees to identify which plots contain the freshest burials. She views a human funeral merely as a delivery of fresh resources, a behavior that the common folk misunderstand as a demonic curse. Her presence turns a sacred churchyard into a personal larder, breaking the peace of the dead to satisfy her specialized diet. She will attack the living if they interrupt her collection, moving with a silent speed. To clear a cemetery of a grave hag, Geralt must prepare his silver blade with advanced necrophage oil and rely heavily on his reflexes. He uses the Yrden trap to slow her movements, as her long limbs allow her to dodge standard strikes with a spider-like agility. He uses his sword to sever her tongue when she extends it to strike, neutralizing her primary weapon before closing the distance. Her destruction is a necessary act of hygiene for a community that wants to bury its dead with dignity. Part 11. Water Hags and Bilge Hags. Water Hags and their deep-sea variants, Bilge Hags, are apex swamp predators that physically resemble the raw environment they occupy. A water hag is caked in thick layers of stinking mud, river weeds, and decomposing silt, her features completely hidden beneath the camouflage of the marsh. She utilizes this natural cover to blend into the stagnant pools of places like Crookback Bog, remaining motionless until a traveller approaches the edge of the water. The primary tactical ability of the water hag is her supernatural manipulation of the surrounding muck. She can scoop up balls of toxic mud and hurl them with absolute accuracy at a witch's face, the impact blinding his vision and disrupting his senses. While the hunter is struggling to clear his eyes, the hag lunges forward with a sudden velocity, using her long, calcified claws to inflict deep tears in his leather armor. Her combat style is a dirty, efficient ambush. Bilge hags represent a specific variation that haunts the dark holds and bilge water of shipping vessels. They crawl aboard ships during midnight anchorages, nesting in the damp spaces where the waste accumulates. They terrorize the sailors, their presence turning a trading voyage into a survival struggle in the dark. Both variations indicate an ecosystem that has been completely choked by decay, a place where the land itself feels as though it has evolved a mouth to consume people. Geralt clears these marsh predators by applying advanced necrophage oil and using the Igni sign to dry out their mud camouflage. Fire is highly effective against their wet skin, causing the mud to crack and exposing their vulnerable flesh to the silver blade. The Witcher must remain mobile, dodging her mud projectiles while closing the distance to execute a series of heavy sword strikes. Her death returns a grim silence to the swamp, removing a predator that has turned the water into a trap. Part 12. Wraiths. Wraiths represent a violent breakdown of the natural boundary between life and death, transforming acute psychological trauma into a tangible entity. When an individual suffers a sudden death characterized by deep betrayal, extreme fear, or unfinished business, their consciousness can become permanently pinned to the physical location of their demise. They do not possess a brain or a heart, operating as a residual loop of the negative emotions they experienced at the moment of their termination. A wraith manifests as an ethereal silhouette draped in the rags of its former life, its form hovering above the ground without making a sound. It weaponizes a spiritual lantern and a rusted blade, using the energy of its grief to drain the vital life force of anyone who invades its territory. It doesn't hunt out of a desire for food, driven entirely by a frantic compulsion to inflict its own suffering upon the living. The entity is a ghost that refuses to be forgotten by the world that broke it. The primary difficulty of hunting a wraith is its non-corporeal nature. A standard sword strike will pass cleanly through its vaporous form without inflicting any physical damage, leaving the hunter vulnerable to its immediate retaliation. They can flicker through the material world, disappearing during a combat exchange only to rematerialize behind a witch's back. This spatial mobility turns a simple room or ruin into a high-stakes dance of mechanical dodging and magical trapping. To force a wraith into a tangible state, Geralt must deploy the Yrden trap. The magical circle anchors the spirit's energy to the material plane, forcing its vaporous form to solidify where the silver sword can reach its vital matrices. He coats his blade with spectre oil to disrupt its ethereal composition, breaking the loop of its existence with a series of precise strikes. The destruction of a wraith is an act of exorcism, a way to clear the air of a tragedy that has left a permanent scar on the landscape. Part 13. Noonwraiths. The Noonwraith is a beautifully tragic spectre in northern lore, born exclusively from young women who suffer violent deaths immediately prior to or during their wedding day. A brutal murder or a forced suicide driven by familial betrayal can pin the bride's spirit to the physical geography of sun-drenched agricultural fields. They do not haunt the dark cellars or the old crypts, manifesting only at the absolute peak of midday heat when the sun is high and the air is still. A Noonwraith appears as a floating skeletal silhouette, wrapped in the shredded remains of a dirt-caked white bridal veil. She wanders the grain fields in a state of absolute madness, her features a mask of sun-dried skin and empty sockets. She does not look for gold or blood, capturing isolated farmers or travelers who cross her fields at noon. She forces her victims into a frantic, hyper-accelerated dance that continues until the target's lungs collapse and their heart bursts from physical exhaustion. The presence of a Noonwraith turns a peaceful place of harvest into a haunted zone, where the common folk are afraid to work during the day. The peasantry try to appease the spirit by leaving small offerings at the edge of the fields. But a residual loop of betrayal cannot be settled with grain or milk. The entity is a permanent reminder of a domestic crime that the community tried to bury in the mud, a ghost that uses the light of the sun to expose its own murder. To dismantle a Noonwraith, Geralt must use the moon dust bomb to prevent her from dissolving into the light, and deploy Yrden traps to anchor her white veil to the earth. He uses spectre oil on his silver blade to cut through the illusions she creates during the fight, as she can split into multiple mirror clones to drain the life force of her target. The duel is a quiet, heavy exchange in the heat of the noon sun, ending when the silver sword finally breaks the memory of the wedding day. Part 14. Nightwraiths. Operating as the absolute astrological mirror to their daytime counterparts, Nightwraiths are forged from identical scenarios of domestic trauma and violent betrayal. They do not manifest under the bright sun of the harvest fields, appearing exclusively under the shroud of absolute darkness, floating through moonlit meadows, abandoned rural paths, and lonely crossroads. A Nightwraith turns the midnight countryside into a place of isolation and fear. She is the shadow of a crime that refuses to stay hidden in the dark. A Nightwraith appears as a dark silhouette, draped in a midnight black dress, her form nearly invisible against the night sky. She possesses a cold omnipresence, her movement accompanied by a sudden drop in the local temperature and a heavy silence that kills the sound of the insects. Like the Noonwraith, she is driven by a state of absolute madness, her consciousness locked into the final emotions of her violent termination. She views the living as an insult to her own cold isolation. During a fight, the Nightwraith exhibits an advanced ability to create multiple illusory clones of her silhouette. These phantoms surround a witcher, drawing the vital life force out of his body to heal the core form of the spectre. This defense mechanism requires Geralt to remain highly mobile, using his steel or silver to quickly dissipate the clones before they can complete the health loop. The combat is a high-stakes race against the darkness, where a single mistake can restore the phantom's full vitality. Geralt anchors these dark phantoms by deploying the Yrden trap, forcing their vaporous bodies into a tangible state where the silver blade can inflict physical damage He uses specter oil to disrupt their dark composition, cutting through the black dress to reach the core of the spirit's energy. The destruction of a Nightwraith returns a natural silence to the crossroads, removing a ghost that used the cover of midnight to reenact the tragedy of her murder over and over again. Part 15. Plague Maidens. A Pester, or Plague Maiden, is an exceptionally rare and terrifying tier of spectre that manifests only during times of catastrophic biological devastation. Born from an individual who experienced a prolonged death characterized by total isolation and overwhelming terror, such as an outbreak of the Catriona plague, their consciousness becomes a physical vector for the disease. She appears as a floating, emaciated phantom wrapped in a shroud of rot, her features completely ruined by the marks of the infection. The Plague Maiden does not operate on a simple hunting instinct, acting as a literal, walking source of pestilence across the countryside. She is accompanied by an active, swirling cloud of phantom rats and biting flies that carry the rot of the plague to every village she visits. She drifts through the empty streets of quarantine settlements, her presence turning a local health crisis into a permanent haunting. She is the personification of a community's abandonment, a ghost born from the fear of the sick. The danger of a pester is entirely biochemical and spiritual, as her very breath can introduce the marks of the plague into a witch's mutated system. A single encounter inside an enclosed space like a ruined tower is a high-stakes gamble against infection, requiring the professional to predose with specialized antidotes like Golden Oriole. The Phantom uses her cloud of rats to disrupt a hunter's footing, hiding within the swarm to execute a series of swift strikes with her spectral claws. To dismantle a Plague Maiden, Geralt must use his silver sword coated in spectre oil, and rely on the Igni sign to burn away the shroud of flies. He uses the Yerden trap to anchor her emaciated form to the floorboards, cutting through the rot to break the loop of her suffering. The destruction of a pester is a matter of public hygiene as much as it is an exorcism, removing an automated weapon of mass biological destruction that has turned the memory of a plague into a permanent nightmare for the living. Part 16. Hym. The Hym represents a highly specialized, non-corporeal shadow demon that operates entirely outside the standard animal instincts of the bestiary. It doesn't hunt for flesh, blood, or raw biomass, functioning instead as a psychological parasite that feeds on the dark emotional energy of human suffering. The demon attaches itself exclusively to individuals who harbor a deep, unconfessed sense of personal guilt or a hidden crime, turning their own conscience into a lethal weapon against their sanity. The entity fastens its form directly to the victim's shadow, remaining completely invisible to the outside world while it begins the process of psychological destruction. It subjects its host to severe, continuous auditory hallucinations, whispering their darkest secrets back into their ears during the quiet hours of the night. This constant pressure induces an intense state of paranoia and night terrors, systematically breaking down the host's mental defenses until they can no longer differentiate between reality and the shadow. As the host's sanity collapses, the Hym drives them to extreme acts of self-mutilation and madness, feeding on the intense waves of shame and fear generated by their self-destruction. The demon doesn't kill the host directly, preferring to maintain them as a permanent source of emotional sustenance for as long as possible. The presence of a Hym turns a wealthy estate or a Giles longhouse into a place of silent horror, where the master of the house is found crying over his own shadow in a dark room. A witcher faces a profound narrative and tactical dilemma when contracted to remove a Hym from a host. He can choose the traditional contract path, which requires him to spend a night inside a pitch-black room with the victim, using his mutated senses to track the alignment of the shadow. This path leads to a brutal physical fight against a manifestation of pure darkness, requiring the immediate use of spectre oil, moondust bombs, and the Quen shield to survive the shadow's claws. Alternatively, a witcher can execute a daring psychological trick to deceive the demon into abandoning its host entirely. This method requires a collaborator to create a scenario of simulated moral horror, forcing the witcher to participate in an act that looks like an unprovoked crime without actually harboring any internal guilt. If the Hym is deceived into jumping to the witcher's shadow to feed on the new sin, It finds no sustenance in a mind that acted without guilt, causing its form to dissolve into the air. The hymn is a testament to the idea that the internal choices of men can create terrors far more specialized than any beast in the woods. It turns a hidden sin into a physical parasite, proving that the mind can build its own executioner when locked in a cycle of unconfessed trauma. Geralt's resolution of a hymn contract requires a patient understanding of human psychology, showing that the silver sword is only effective when the hunter knows how to handle the shadow behind the man. Part 17. Botchlings and Lubberkins. The botchling is a grotesque manifestation of familial shame and improper burial rituals, born from the absolute failure of paternal responsibility. When an unwanted or stillborn infant is discarded in a shallow grave without receiving a formal naming ceremony or recognition by the household, the residual life force mutates into a parasitic monster. It appears as a hairless, reptilian fetal entity that crawls through the shadows of the compound at night. Its features a twisted reflection of the child that should have been. The biology of a botchling is entirely predatory, driven by a frantic need to drain the blood and vitality of pregnant women to sustain its own unstable matrix. It sneaks into the bedrooms of the household, fastening its long claws to the chest of the sleeping victim to suffocate them, while it siphons their life force through a prehensile tongue. This systematic drainage causes rapid degeneration in the mother and ensures the death of the unborn child, turning a domestic secret into a lethal curse for the entire lineage. If a witcher chooses to slaughter the creature for its blood, he faces a brutal physical fight against an entity that can mutate into a larger, hyper-aggressive predator when threatened. The botchling expands its mass, its skin turning a dark color, and its jaw splitting open to reveal rows of needle-sharp teeth that can tear through leather armor. This path treats the entity as a standard monster to be destroyed, but it leaves the family's trauma permanently open, ensuring that the curse's shadow remains over the home. Alternatively, the Witcher can guide the repentant father through a highly dangerous naming ritual to pacify the spirit and lift the curse from the household. This path requires the father to physically cradle the grotesque, pulsating fetal monster in his arms, carrying it to the threshold of the home, while Geralt uses his signs to protect them from a pack of spectral wraiths attracted by the magic. The father must formally name the child as his own, accepting the weight of his failure in the light of the moon. If the ritual succeeds, the biological horror deconstructs, its reptilian skin dissolving into a gentle glowing spirit known as a lubberkin. This protective household guardian spirit is completely free of the botchling's bloodlust, remaining attached to the home to actively shield the family from future misfortune. The lubberkin can look past the veil of the material world, using its light to guide the Witcher through the dark woods to follow the psychic trail of the missing family members. The transformation of a botchling into a lubberkin is a masterclass in the moral architecture of the Witcher universe. It proves that the supernatural terrors of the continent are frequently tied to the choices of the living, and that redemption requires a physical confrontation with your own monstrous actions. A father cannot hide behind his gold or his soldiers when his own sins are weeping beneath his threshold, and the Witcher's role is to provide the structure needed to turn the horror back into a child. The werewolf is a classic, agonizing study in dual consciousness and the total breakdown of human agency under a lycanthropic curse. Forged through powerful black magic or a severe, personalized curse born from an act of extreme cruelty, the victim is forcefully transformed into a massive bipedal lupine predator. The physical transformation is a brutal anatomical deconstruction that occurs under the light of the full moon, turning an ordinary man into a machine of raw violence. The mechanics of the curse involve a total rewriting of the host's biology, forcing their muscles to tear and elongate while their skeletal structure fractures and rebuilds itself into a predatory shape. Their jaw expands to handle rows of long teeth, and their digits sprout thick claws engineered for ripping through leather and flesh. This physical expansion is accompanied by a severe surge of predatory instinct that floods the human brain with a permanent, unhinged bloodlust that cannot be controlled by reason. The true horror of the werewolf is that the human consciousness remains trapped deep inside the monster's mind during the hunt. The host is not unconscious. They are reduced to a helpless passenger who is forced to watch through their own eyes as their beastly body slaughters and devours their friends, family, and neighbors. They retain their human memories and emotions, but their physical actions are completely governed by the hunger of the wolf, creating an internal prison of permanent psychological trauma. In a fight, a werewolf is an incredibly dangerous threat due to its advanced cellular regeneration capability. Any physical lacerations inflicted by a sword heal near instantly, the tissue sealing itself over before the blood can hit the floorboards. This healing loop requires a witcher to deploy specialized alchemical tools, specifically cursed oil and moondust bombs, to temporarily halt the regeneration and allow the silver blade to reach the creature's vital organs. Geralt moves through these contracts with a deep caution, knowing that the werewolf he's tracking was once a member of the community. He uses the Igni sign to cauterize the wounds during the exchange, breaking through the creature's high-speed lunges to execute a series of precise strikes. The final blow is often an act of mercy for the human passenger inside, putting an end to a dual existence that has turned the simple act of survival into a daily horror. The werewolf remains a symbol of the fragile nature of human identity when faced with the power of a curse. It shows that a man can be stripped of his agency by the malice of others, turned into a monster against his own will while his conscience remains clean. Geralt's bestiary mindset allows him to analyze the mechanics of the lycanthropy, separating the wild rage of the beast from the broken man who is waiting for the silver sword to set him free. Part 19. Berserkers and Ulfheden, deeply embedded within the isolationist maritime clans of the Skellige Isles, lies the mythic and physical reality of the Berserkers. Unlike traditional continental werewolves who are victims of an involuntary curse, Berserkers are specific warriors who intentionally induce a violent, monstrous metamorphosis during sacred clan rituals. They belong to a secret subculture within the islands, using the power of the beast as a weapon to defend their territory from the empires of the south. The transformation is triggered through the consumption of specialized hallucinogenic mushrooms and the channeling of a primal, ancestral battle rage. During the ritual, the warrior's human identity is completely obliterated as his body expands into a massive bear or a giant wolf, known as an Ulfheden in its elder tier. The change is a complete biological rewrite that trades human reason for a physical dominance that can smash through a shield wall in a single charge. The danger of a berserker on the battlefield is his total inability to differentiate between friend and foe once the bloodlust takes hold. They become uncontrollable weapons of mass violence who will slaughter their own clan brothers with the same fury they show to Nilfgaardian soldiers. This lack of control turns their sacred warrior tradition into a dangerous liability for the Jarls, who frequently view the secret rituals as an insult to the honor of the clans. An Ulfheden represents the older, completely corrupted tier of this lycanthropic line, a warrior who has spent too many seasons inside the skin of the beast. They can no longer return to a stable human form, remaining trapped as giant, scarred wolves that haunt the isolated caves and rocky ridges of the islands. They are faster, stronger, and more resilient than standard werewolves, their hides hardened by the salt and the cold permafrost of Skellige. Hunting Ulfheden requires Geralt to adapt his witcher signs to handle a multi-ton predator that moves with a sudden velocity. He uses the Quen shield to absorb the impact of their heavy charges and coats his silver blade with advanced cursed oil to break through their thick hides. He must remain mobile on the rocky terrain, using the Axis sign to temporarily confuse their predatory focus before executing a series of heavy sword strikes to reach their vitals. The Berserker lore highlights the complex relationship between Skellige culture and the natural world, showing how the desire for military power can drive men to sacrifice their own humanity. They are warriors who chose to become monsters to protect their lines, only to find that the beast doesn't respect the laws of the clan. Geralt walks through their blood-stained halls with a quiet gravity, realizing that the axes of Skellige are often turned on their own legends. Part 20. The Toad Prince. The story of the Toad Prince, featured in the Hearts of Stone expansion, serves as a masterful deconstruction of classic fairy tale tropes, transformed into pure biological body horror. When a foreign prince named Servat travelled to the capital to court a noblewoman, He was struck by a vindictive, broken-hearted curse, placed by a romantic rival. He was not turned into a charming, cartoonish amphibian waiting for a kiss. He was mutated into a massive, pulsating monster that took over the Oxenfurt sewer network. The anatomy of the Toad Prince is an industrial hazard that has completely unhinged the ecology of the city's underbelly. The creature possesses a massive, bloated chassis covered in pustules that constantly secrete large quantities of boiling, highly corrosive toxic slime. This slime fills the drainage channels, melting the iron bars and infecting the municipal water supply with a foul pestilence that has paralyzed the local population with fear. His combat mechanics are a showcase of specialized amphibious predation adapted to an enclosed stone environment. He possesses a hyper-extended prehensile tongue that can flash across a tunnel with a sudden velocity, instantly snapping a soldier's spine or dragging a fully armored witcher into his maw. He can launch his multi-ton mass into the air, using the downward impact to crush anyone trapped beneath his weight and releasing a shockwave of toxic fluid. Furthermore, the creature breathes out massive clouds of deadly methane gas that fill the chambers, turning the sewer into a toxic vice where a single spark can ignite a secondary explosion. Geralt is forced to enter this subterranean nightmare with a highly specialized alchemical loadout, pre-dosing his mutated system with golden aureole to turn the prince's venom into a source of healing, and using northern wind bombs to freeze the slime coat. The fight is a heavy, claustrophobic duel against a biological bioweapon that has no capacity for human reason left in its brain. Geralt uses his silver blade, coated in cursed oil, to cut through the thick layers of amphibian fat, dodging the tongue strikes while utilizing the ignisign to ignite the methane clouds around the monster's head. The final blow shatters the creature's matrix, releasing the curse and leaving behind a dying prince in the dark water. The tragedy of the Toad Prince shows that the curses of the powerful always leave a trail of collateral damage that the common folk must endure. A lover's quarrel between high-born elites turned the city's infrastructure into a charnel house, requiring a mutant steel to clean out the waste. Geralt stands over the body of the foreign prince, his leather armor covered in corrosive bile, realizing that the stories of the bards always leave out the stench of the sewers. Part 21. Archospores. Archospores are aggressive botanical monsters that germinate exclusively in soil saturated with human blood. They don't sprout from normal seeds, requiring the residue of a violent murder or a domestic execution to trigger their growth. The plant functions as a physical manifestation of the land's memory of a hidden crime, anchoring its roots to the exact location where the violence occurred. A beautiful meadow can quickly transform into a trap when the soil has been defiled by a secret slaughter. The anatomy of these predatory plants is completely adapted for defensive ambush tactics. An archospore possesses long roots that can burrow through solid stone to erupt directly beneath a traveller's feet. The central bulb resembles a massive flower, but it hides a muscular maw that secretes a volatile acid. They don't look for sunlight, driven entirely by a mechanical instinct to punish anyone who approaches the site of the original sin. The combat mechanics of the archospore present a unique challenge due to their high mobility beneath the topsoil. They can retreat into the ground instantly, disappearing from a witcher's view only to rematerialize a few feet away to launch a secondary assault. This underground movement makes them incredibly elusive targets for a standard sword style, forcing the professional to rely on defensive shields to survive the unexpected eruptions. An archospore weaponizes its own reproductive matrix during a fight, shooting high-velocity bursts of corrosive fluid from its central stalk. This acid can melt through leather armor and inflict deep chemical burns on human flesh within seconds. Furthermore, the creature drops its own seed pods around its territory, which act as explosive caltrops that detonate when stepped on, turning the surrounding grass into a toxic minefield. To dismantle these botanical horrors, Geralt must utilize specialized alchemical preparations. He coats his silver blade with cursed oil to break through the plant's tough fiber layers, and relies heavily on the ignisign to scorch the central bulb. Fire disrupts their internal circulation, forcing the stalks to wither and preventing them from executing their rapid burrowing cycles. It's a grueling process of burning out a weed that is fed on human blood. The presence of archer spores across the fields of the continent is a constant reminder that human cruelty leaves a permanent mark on the landscape. They show that when a community tries to bury a crime in the dirt, the land itself will eventually build a mouth to scream about the murder. Geralt cleans out these toxic roots with a weary detachment, knowing that the plant is merely the physical consequence of a human rot that happened long before he arrived. Part 22. Wolves and Wild Dogs. Ordinary animals pose a massive threat to human survival within the realistic landscape of the continent. As the Third Northern War burns down agricultural infrastructure and displaces thousands of families, the boundary between civilization and the wilderness completely vanishes. Packs of wolves and feral dogs have become the dominant predators along the roads, thriving on the collapse of human society without requiring a single trace of magic or ancient curses. Packs of domestic hunting hounds are frequently abandoned by their dead masters when a village is destroyed by the passing armies. These animals don't starve in the woods, quickly regressing to their raw ancestral instincts to survive the winter. They combine the natural tracking capability of wild wolves with a complete lack of fear toward human scent, turning their previous familiarity with mankind into a dangerous advantage on the path. Feral dogs stalk refugees along the war-torn roads, targeting the weak, the injured, and the isolated. They don't hunt out of a supernatural malice, operating on a basic biological hunger that views a displaced population as an accessible harvest of protein. They move in large groups that can easily surround a soldier or a merchant, using their numbers to wear down a target's defenses through a series of quick snaps. The common folk frequently mistake the violence of these wild packs for a monstrous curse, begging the witches to clear the woods of spectral beasts. Geralt recognizes these animals as a natural function of a broken ecosystem, using his steel sword rather than his silver blade to deal with the threat. He applies beast oil to his weapon to ensure clean strikes, and uses the Igni sign to scatter the pack before they can complete their perimeter. This terrestrial danger highlights the rapid degeneration of the continent's security during a total war. When the local garrisons are pulled to the front lines, the roads are left to the scavengers, proving that human violence always creates a vacuum that nature will reclaim with teeth. The wild dogs are a physical manifestation of societal decay, a mundane horror that turns a simple journey between towns into a survival struggle. Geralt rides through these encounters with a quiet, practical caution, refusing to waste his expensive potions on ordinary predators. He sees that the war has turned the domestic protectors of men into the executioners of their children, a reality that mirrors the bleakness of the landscape. The packs keep their distance when they see the white hair and the twin blades, recognizing an apex predator that is far more lethal than themselves. Part 23. Bears and Skellige predators. Terrestrial predators like the massive cave bears of Skellige and the brown bears of the Redanian wilderness represent the unmutated power of the natural world. Free from the influence of post-conjunction anomalies, these apex beasts occupy a violent role in the continental ecosystem. They don't rely on illusions, poison, or magical teleports to hunt, using their immense mass and physical strength to dominate their territories. A mature bear possesses a massive bone density and thick hide layers capable of absorbing crossbow bolts without losing its momentum. They are incredibly resilient targets that can survive multiple sword strikes, their physical structure engineered to endure the harsh winters of the north. A single downward swipe of their multi-ton paw can crush a soldier's ribcage or break through the leather armor of a witcher, requiring absolute mechanical caution during an encounter. These natural predators turn the deep caves and mountain tracks into hazardous zones for the local hunters. They don't look for conflict with humans, but they will defend their feeding grounds and their cubs with a fierce territorial drive that leaves no room for diplomacy. The peasantry view the bear with a deep respect, weaving its image into their tribal shields and using its strength as a measure of their own warriors. Hunting a cave bear requires Geralt to utilize identical tactical focus as if he were facing a magical relict. He relies heavily on beast oil to increase the depth of his steel strikes, and maintains his Quen shield throughout the exchange to absorb the crushing momentum of their rushes. He can't parry their heavy attacks, forcing him to rely on high-speed dodging to position his blade behind the creature's shoulders. The wilderness of the continent remains a dangerous place even without the presence of specters or necrophages. The bears are a reminder that the natural order has its own teeth, and that humanity's expansion is constantly checked by predators that refuse to yield their hunting grounds. Geralt respects their place in the ecosystem, killing them only when they directly threaten a trade route or an occupied settlement. He leaves the carcasses to the local skinners, taking nothing but the meat or a trophy to fulfill the terms of the contract. The encounter is a simple test of physical survival, a clean break from the political deceptions and magical curses that usually structure his work on the path. The bear lies in the snow, a monument to the raw power of a world that doesn't need magic to be lethal. Part 24. Sirens and Echidnae. Sirens and their larger alpha variants, the Echidnae, turn the rocky archipelagos and open waters of Skellige into an aerial nightmare. These hybrids are uniquely adapted for both marine and airborne predation, using the jagged cliffs of the islands as nesting grounds. They don't hunt on the open plains of the continent, their entire life cycle bound to the tempestuous seas and the shipping lanes of the northern clans. A siren utilizes a powerful vocal frequency to project enchanting songs across the waves, a magical mechanism designed to confuse the senses of sailors. From a distance, their illusions can make them resemble beautiful maidens floating in the surf, a folklore trick that lures longships directly into hidden coral reefs. The moment a vessel strikes the stones, the illusion drops to reveal their true reptilian anatomy. The physical structure of these hybrids features a grotesque fusion of human torsos and scaled tails, completed by massive leather wingspans. They sprout rows of needle-sharp teeth and long talons, engineered to rip sailors straight from their rigging, dragging their victims down to drown in the freezing ocean. They move through the air with an erratic velocity, diving out of the clouds to launch high-speed strikes against any exposed deck. Echidnae represent the elder tier of this family, possessing a greater mass and a toxic venom that coats their talons. They are highly aggressive alpha predators that command the smaller siren packs during a storm, their piercing cries supercharging nearby hybrids into a feeding frenzy. A single encounter with an echidna on a narrow cliff face is a high-stakes gamble, where a single misstep means a fall into the abyss. To dismantle these aerial predators, Geralt must use his specialized crossbow to break their flight patterns and force them onto the stones. He deploys the yard sign to disrupt their aerodynamics when they attempt a diving charge, bringing them down to the ground where his silver sword can reach their vital matrices. He coats his blade with hybrid oil to ensure his cuts slice through their tough wing leather. The sirens turn the maritime trade of Skellige into a continuous survival struggle, proving that the sea holds horrors that match the darkness of the swamps. The clans accept their presence as a natural condition of their home, singing songs about the sailors who were dragged into the deep. Geralt clears the high rocks with a steady focus, his cat eyes tracking the shadows against the grey sky until the water turns quiet. Part 25. Harpies. Harpies are filth-caked, winged scavengers that establish hyper-dense nesting colonies within the high mountain passes and abandoned ruins of the continent. Appearing as a grotesque fusion of a hunched bird and a withered human face, these hybrids are a constant hazard for travelers crossing the peaks. They don't possess the noble appearance of griffins, living in their own waste and filling their territory with a permanent stench of rot. The strategy of the harpy relies entirely on overwhelming swarm numbers and absolute tactical opportunism. A single hybrid is cowardly and easily frightened by a display of steel, but they never hunt alone, moving across the ridges in large flocks. They circle high above the mountain paths, using their sharp vision to identify weak or isolated targets before launching a coordinated, screaming flurry of claws and beaks. Harpies exhibit a low-level pack intelligence, using the vertical geography of the cliffs to their advantage during a fight. They will lift heavy stones into the air to drop them on a traveler's head, disabling their prey before descending to pick the bones clean. Their nests are littered with the rusted armor, broken wagons, and empty purses of their victims, an environmental record of their success as scavengers. Geralt handles a harpy swarm by utilizing the Ard sign to clear the air around him, forcing the winged creatures to crash onto the gravel paths. Once grounded, their clumsy terrestrial movement makes them easy targets for his silver sword, which he prepares with hybrid oil to cut through their feathered hides. He must remain highly mobile, dodging the diving slashes while executing a sequence of fast steel or silver strikes. The presence of these scavengers within elven ruins and forgotten human fortresses shows how quickly civilization can be reclaimed by the wild. Harpies don't build structures, using the broken towers of men as simple perches to watch the roads below for fresh protein. They are a constant nuisance for the trade routes, turning a narrow pass into a gauntlet where a traveller must keep one eye fixed on the sky. The Witcher clears the nests with an absolute efficiency, using grape-shot bombs to destroy their eggs and break their regional numbers. He doesn't feel any sympathy for these creatures, viewing them as a dangerous infestation that must be managed to keep the paths open. The mountains fall silent when the last flock is scattered, leaving the white-haired mutant to continue his journey through the rocks without the sound of their screams. Part 26. Griffins and Archgriffins. The Griffin family represents the apex of aerial hybrid predation on the continent, combining the forward torso, wings, and beak of a massive eagle with the muscular hindquarters of a lion. These creatures are majestic but terrifying apex predators that maintain large territories across the northern kingdoms. They don't hide in the deep caves, nesting on the highest ridges to watch the livestock pastures and trading roads below. Griffins are hyper-protective creatures that mate for life, a biological trait that frequently leads to catastrophic conflicts with human settlements. If a military garrison or a group of peasants slaughters a nesting female, the surviving male will launch a systematic campaign of revenge against the entire region. He will abandon his natural diet to hunt humans exclusively, burning through the local militia until the valley is paralyzed by fear. The griffin encountered in the Valley of White Orchard serves as Geralt's definitive operational test at the beginning of his search. The beast had been driven mad by the slaughter of his mate by the local garrison, turning the trade route into his personal hunting zone. Geralt is forced to become a forensic investigator to track the creature, studying its feathers, its kill patterns, and the layout of its ruined nest before setting a trap. The combat mechanics of a griffin require a precise coordination of specialized tools and witcher signs. The creature uses its massive leather wingspans to execute high-velocity diving charges that can knock a hunter off his feet and shred his leather armor. Geralt uses his specialized crossbow and localized Ard blasts to physically break the beast's aerodynamics, forcing its massive chassis onto the ground where his blade can reach. Once on the terrestrial plane, the griffin deploys its hooked beak and heavy talons to launch a series of rapid sweeping strikes. Geralt applies hybrid oil to his silver sword to ensure his cuts dismantle the creature's thick muscle structure, dodging the forward lunges to score deep lacerations along its flanks. The fight is a high-stakes test of reflexes, as a single mistake against an archgriffin's toxic bile can end a witcher's life. The destruction of a griffin is a vital service for a community, restoring safety to the fields and allowing the harvests to continue. Geralt handles the contract with a professional detachment, recognizing that the beast was merely reacting to the violence of the war that broke its nest. He takes the head as a trophy to claim his imperial coin, leaving the valley a little quieter but no less broken by the soldiers. Part 27. Succubi. The succubus introduces a profound degree of professional and ethical complexity to a witcher's contract parameters. Classified as intelligent hybrids, these horned humanoids possess caprine legs, full human speech capabilities, and a deep emotional capacity. Unlike the vast majority of the bestiary, a succubus doesn't hunt out of a desire for human flesh, blood, or dead biomass, surviving entirely through a distinct biological process. A succubus lives by draining localized life energy through consensual, hyper-passionate encounters with local villagers or soldiers. They possess an immense charm and physical allure that attracts the native men, turning an ordinary farmhouse or a city basement into a secret meeting ground. They don't use physical violence to secure their targets, relying on the willingness of their partners to participate in the exchange. This behavior frequently causes a severe social crisis within human communities, leading to a contract being placed on the notice boards. The village elders, or jealous spouses, view the succubus as a corrupting monster that is stealing their youth and disrupting the order of the town. They demand her execution under the law, using the word monster to justify the destruction of a sentient being that operates outside their dogma. Geralt frequently refuses to execute these contracts, his personal code forbidding the slaughter of intelligent entities that are capable of negotiation. When he tracks a succubus to her lair, he often finds a creature that is genuinely mourning a partner who died from physical exhaustion, rather than a malicious killer. He chooses to negotiate a relocation, forcing the hybrid to leave the district to protect her from the local militia. This neutrality places the Witcher in an uncomfortable position with his employers, who view his refusal as a sign of mutant freakishness or professional cowardice. They want a simple execution, and he hands them a moral lesson about the definition of monstrosity. The succubus arc proves that the bestiary is filled with grey areas, and that the silver sword must be guided by a mind that understands the value of sentience. The hybrid leaves behind a scent of perfume and sulphur in her cave, a sensory reminder of an encounter that didn't require the shedding of blood. Geralt pockets his map without a fee, riding out of the town with the realization that the true source of the conflict was human jealousy rather than public safety. The path continues, and the line between the human and the monstrous remains as thin as a single word. Part 28. Wyverns. Wyverns are large, hyper-aggressive, airborne draconids that turn open plains, high rocky escarpments, and livestock pastures into active hunting grounds. Lacking the high intelligence and magical capabilities of true dragons, wyverns operate on pure, efficient predatory instinct. They view the moving caravans and sheep herds of the continent merely as an accessible source of biomass needed to feed their high mountain nests. A wyvern possesses a massive leather wingspan that allows it to execute high-velocity diving attacks from the clouds. They use their immense momentum to knock travelers off horseback or smash through the wooden roofs of shepherd huts during a raid. This aerial dominance changes the traditional rules of engagement, forcing any traveler to keep one eye fixed on the sky whenever they cross an open plain in the north. Once forced onto the ground, the wyvern deploys a long, prehensile tail tipped with a calcified, venomous stinger. This weapon can deliver a highly concentrated dose of necrotoxic poison that liquefies human tissue and causes rapid systemic failure. A single scratch from the tail can end a soldier's life before he can draw his weapon, making an encounter with a nesting pair a high-stakes gamble for an ordinary militia squad. To survive an assignment against a wyvern, Geralt must pre-dose his mutated system with golden oriole to neutralize the tail venom. He coats his silver sword with draconid oil to cut through the heavy scales that protect the creature's throat, and uses the Ard sign to break its diving momentum. The combat is a mechanical execution of dodging and striking, where the Witcher must disable the wings to keep the beast on the stones. These draconids establish their nests on the edges of trade routes, turning the infrastructure of the kingdoms into their personal larders. They are an ordinary hazard of life on the continent, their movements monitored by the local barons, who offer small bounties for their heads. Geralt handles the contracts with a steady focus, his cat eyes tracking the shadow of the wings against the sun until the silver blade finds the soft flesh beneath the jaw. The carcass lies on the grass, its leather wings broken, and its stinger severed by the Witcher's steel. Geralt takes the claws and the blood for his alchemical studies, leaving the meat to the local scavengers who follow his trail. The road is clear for the merchants once again, but the mountains remain full of nests, a permanent reminder that the sky of the continent has its own masters. Part 29. Forktails. The forktail is a highly agile, medium-tier draconid that receives its name from the unique, scissor-like bone configurations at the tip of its long tail. While smaller than a full-grown wyvern, a forktail is an incredibly dangerous threat to rural logistics and human travelers. They don't hide in the deep wilderness, choosing to hunt along the river valleys and livestock paths where the prey is easy to locate. A forktail specializes in low-altitude, high-speed sweeps across agricultural valleys, using its claws to lift cattle, sheep, and human farmers cleanly off the earth. Their flight patterns are erratic and fast, allowing them to dodge standard arrow fire from the village guards with a bird-like agility. This speed makes them a persistent plague for the regional economies, as a single nesting pair can clear an entire valley of its livestock in a season. The mechanics of a forktail hunt require a professional to alter his traditional combat pacing. The creature uses its unique tailbones to execute rapid, horizontal slashes that can sever a horse's legs or cut a soldier in two during a low pass. The tail isn't just venomous, it's a mechanical blade that moves with a sudden velocity, forcing a witcher to remain in a constant state of defensive motion throughout the exchange. Geralt grounds these agile draconids by relying heavily on grape-shot bombs or precise ard blasts to physically disrupt their aerodynamics during a diving charge. The shockwave forces the creature to crash into the mud, breaking its momentum and opening a gap for the silver sword. He applies draconid oil to his blade to cut through the thick scales of its underbelly, using high-speed pirouettes to score deep lacerations before it can take flight again. The fight is a test of agility and positioning, where the Witcher must use the environment to block the creature's wide wing sweeps. He uses the Quen shield to absorb the residual impact of the tail strikes, his eyes fixed on the movement of the bone configurations. The forktail is an efficient hunter, but its reliance on low passes makes its trajectory predictable to a mutant who has spent decades studying the mechanics of flight. The contract concludes when the silver blade splits the creature's throat, returning a natural peace to the agricultural valley. Geralt collects the head as proof for the village elder, his leather armor covered in the dark fluid of the draconid. The common folk welcome his return with a mixture of relief and suspicion, realizing that the mutant is the only force capable of keeping the sky from consuming their livelihoods. Part 30. Basilisks and Cockatrices. Basilisks and Cockatrices are specialized draconids that have heavily contaminated local peasant mythology due to their bizarre, avian reptilian appearances. Contrary to uneducated village folklore, a basilisk cannot kill a man simply by looking at him through a magical gaze, nor does a cockatrice hatch from an egg laid by a rooster during eclipse. Their danger is entirely biochemical and physical, rooted in the sharp reality of the bestiary. A basilisk possesses a sharp, hooked beak designed to pierce heavy plate armor, completed by a muscular chassis covered in scales and feathers. Their primary weapon is an incredibly volatile, flesh-liquefying venom that they secrete from their salivary glands. They can spit this fluid across long distances during a fight, turning a narrow cave or a stone ruin into a toxic vice, where a single drop can melt through a soldier's boots. The cockatrice represents a secondary variation that features a more avian appearance, including a thick crest of feathers and long bird-like talons. A single scratch from a cockatrice talon can induce rapid, systemic internal bleeding in a human host, the claws engineered to tear through major arteries with a single downward stroke. They hunt in the dark vaults and subterranean basements of the north, where they can corner their targets in the shadows. Hunting these advanced draconids requires Geralt to use a precise combination of alchemical preparation and mechanical dodging. He must pre-dose his system with golden oil to turn their venom into a source of healing, and apply draconid oil to his silver sword to cut through their feathered hides. He uses the Ard sign to break their forward charges, forcing their clumsy bodies onto the stone floors where his blade can reach their vitals. The fight inside closed spaces is a high-stakes dance where the Witcher must use his mutated senses to predict the trajectory of the spit and the talons. He relies on the Quen shield to absorb the residual impact of their beak strikes, his movements fluid and silent as he circles the beast. The destruction of a basilisk is an act of clean engineering, removing a predator that has turned an ancient ruin into a private charnel house. The old names of folklore are replaced by the hard facts of the bestiary entry once the creature is dead. Geralt takes the venom sacs and the talons for his own alchemical collection, leaving the feathers to the local merchants who value them for decoration. The vaults are clear for the scholars and the thieves once again, and the white wolf rides out into the mist, his silver blade ready for the next shadow in the sky. Part 31. the royal wyvern and contract monsters. The life cycle of a draconid changes fundamentally when the creature avoids human contact for multiple decades. This rare longevity is usually the direct result of regional neglect, where local lords are too distracted by political wars to manage their remote borders. Left undisturbed, the animal outgrows the normal limits of its species, developing a massive frame that alters the local hierarchy of predators. It transitions from a common forest hunter into an alpha threat that commands an entire river valley, demanding an immense supply of daily meat to support its expanded muscular system. A royal wyvern establishes a wide territory that it guards with a fierce jealousy, completely reshaping the local ecology. It drives out lesser monsters to secure exclusive access to human livestock, turning green pastures into silent zones where the common folk are afraid to graze their herds. The beast executes diving attacks from the mountain crags, its heavy weight allowing it to smash through the wooden roofs of barns to claim its prey. This predatory efficiency quickly gridlocks the regional economy, forcing the peasantry to abandon their ancestral fields because the sky has become a permanent hazard. The appearance of a contract monster on a local notice board signals the absolute failure of the local garrison to maintain public safety. Barons and village elders only turn to the witches after their own militia squads have been systematically destroyed by the creature's aerial tactics. Traditional soldiers rely on heavy armor and static shields, which are entirely useless when a multi-ton draconid drops from the clouds at high speeds. The contract isn't an abstract matter of simple glory, but a piece of regional security that must be paid for with the common coin of the settlement. A successful hunt requires a rigorous phase of forensic research rather than a reckless charge into the hills. The professional must analyze the bone fragments left behind at kill sites, study the wind patterns of the valley, and systematically destroy the creature's secondary feeding grounds. This deliberate disruption forces the alpha specimen to openly defend its main nest, bringing it down to a level where a silver blade can reach its vital organs. The preparation is a tactical science that eliminates the guesswork of the path, turning a legendary beast into an ecological problem to be solved. The bestiary notes reveal that the biochemical weapons of an elder draconid undergo an advanced mutation over time, increasing in concentration and toxicity. The royal wyvern utilizes a prehensile tail, tipped with a calcified stinger, that can inject a flesh-liquefying toxin during a terrestrial exchange. A single scratch can cause rapid systemic failure in a human host, forcing a witcher to pre-dose his mutated system with specialized alchemical neutralizers. The combat becomes a quick exercise in positioning, where the hunter must break the wing joints to halt its spatial mobility. The completion of the contract returns a quiet safety to the valley, but the carcass remains a physical monument to the negligence of the ruling class. The beast reached its terrifying scale because the local leaders were too busy with their territorial feuds to protect their own folk. Geralt collects his trophy from the stone ledge, his leather armor covered in the dark fluid of the predator. He rides back toward the settlement, knowing that the coin he receives is just a temporary payment for clearing a human mistake that the land could no longer contain. Part 32. Neckers. The small ogroids, known as neckers, represent a structural hazard for the trade infrastructure of the northern kingdoms. Unlike the solitary giants of the mountains, these hairless predators live within extensive tunnel networks, dug directly beneath the main logging roads and shipping paths. They don't possess the physical mass to challenge an armed traveller alone, relying entirely on their collective velocity to wear down a target. The thick mud of Velen and the deep forests of Redania are full of their hidden burrows, turning any simple journey between towns into an active survival gauntlet. The social structure of a necker burrow is governed by a low-level pack intelligence that uses the illusion of cowardice to bait its prey. A single specimen is naturally timid, scurrying into the undergrowth or hiding behind tree roots when confronted by an armed soldier. This quick retreat frequently misleads inexperienced merchants into a false sense of security, causing them to lower their guards along the trail. But the creature's chattering cry isn't a sign of panic, operating as a calculated signal that alerts the entire pack to the presence of fresh meat. The ambush occurs with a sudden rush, with waves of 10 to 20 individuals bursting from the earth simultaneously. They utilize the dense cover of the brush to surround the target, cutting off any path of escape before their presence is fully registered. They run on all fours with a frantic agility, their movements making it difficult for a standard guard to maintain an effective defensive line. The pack operates like a single organism that closes around the victim, using their numbers to systematically overwhelm a traveler's defenses. The primary weapons of these pack predators are their short claws, which are permanently caked in the filth of their subterranean tunnels. A single scratch can introduce a venomous infection that causes rapid tissue inflammation and muscle weakness in a human host. During a fight, the pack focuses on inflicting hundreds of small lacerations rather than a single lethal blow, systematically draining the target's stamina. The traveler is slowly blinded by the sheer volume of their numbers, their defenses failing as the blood loss takes hold. Dealing with a Necker infestation requires a Witcher to look past individual combat, focusing instead on the destruction of their subterranean infrastructure. Geralt utilizes explosive bombs, like Grapeshot, to collapse the main entrance of their tunnel networks, sealing the pack beneath the earth to protect the trade routes. In close quarters, a quick freeze from a northern wind bomb or a flash of fire from the Igni sign is the only way to break their collective momentum. The Silver Blade must move with a sweeping style to clear the space before the hunter is surrounded. The common folk view the Necker as a simple nuisance, but their abundance represents a deeper failure of the local authorities to maintain regional order. When the provincial garrisons are pulled to the front lines of the war, the roads are left to the scavengers, allowing the burrows to expand until they choke the local trade lanes. Geralt clears the holes with a professional detachment, his cat eyes tracking the dark tunnels beneath the grass. He leaves the path open for the next caravan, knowing that when human society collapses, the Ogroids will always return to reclaim the dirt. Part 33. Cyclopes. The Cyclops represents the simple horror of massive scale and isolated brute force in the wild places of the continent. Residing within the deepest mountain passes of Skellige and the dense forests of the north, these massive Ogroids live completely solitary lives. They don't form tribes, build primitive settlements, or cooperate with other species, occupying large stone caves, where they guard their territory with a fierce jealousy. Their presence is an absolute boundary line that human civilization cannot cross without a high toll in blood. The danger of a Cyclops stems entirely from its colossal mass and skeletal strength, which allow it to dominate its territory without the need for magical traits. The creature possesses no complex tactical finesse, relying on its physical mass to crush any intruder that crosses its border. Their bone density allows them to absorb heavy crossbow fire without losing their footing, and their thick hides are impervious to standard steel blades. A single downward stamp of their foot can flatten a fully armored soldier into a fine paste within seconds. The environment itself becomes a weapon when a Cyclops is provoked into a territorial rage. They can rip mature trees directly out of the earth to utilize as crude clubs, increasing their reach and smashing through the defensive walls of their enemies. They possess a surprising accuracy when handling heavy stones, hurling massive boulders across wide distances to disable traveling wagons before the travelers can flee into the woods. Their combat style is a direct execution of power that breaks the rules of conventional defense. The singular eye of the Cyclops is both its defining feature and its primary vulnerability on the field. While this optical structure grants them an excellent focus on a single target, it strips them of their peripheral vision, making them susceptible to high-speed flanking maneuvers. A trained hunter can exploit this blind spot, using quick dodges to position their blade behind the creature's shoulders while it's still swinging its club. This mechanical limitation turns the giant into a predictable opponent for a mutant who understands the laws of anatomy. Geralt tackles these mountain giants by preparing his silver blade with advanced ogroid oil and relying heavily on his agility. He cannot parry the strikes of a Cyclops, forcing him to use precise mechanical dodging to survive the encounter. He deploys the Quen shield to absorb the residual shockwaves of their ground slams and uses salmon bombs to target the central eye, temporarily blinding the beast to break its physical momentum. The fight is a quiet, heavy test of positioning where a single misstep means immediate death beneath the stones. The carcass of a cyclops is a massive monument to the sharpness of a witcher's trade, left to the elements once the contract is fulfilled. Geralt takes the eyes and the bone marrow for his alchemical mixtures, leaving the giant body to the mountain scavengers. The pass is restored to the control of the local merchants, but the victory is purely temporary. The wild places of the continent will always produce giants, proving that human expansion is continuously checked by forces that refuse to bow to the laws of kings. Part 34. Trolls. Rock trolls and ice trolls are some of the most complex, universally loathed, and tragi-comic entities within the bestiary. Possessing thick geological hides composed of living stone and mineral deposits, these ogroids are incredibly durable creatures that can survive for centuries in the wild. They don't share the pure animalistic bloodlust of neckers or the isolation of cyclopes, displaying a rudimentary childlike mastery of human speech that completely alters the nature of a contract. A troll operates on a highly simplified literal moral framework that dictates its daily behavior. They are deeply bound to specific territorial tasks that they assign themselves, such as guarding a ruined bridge, managing a corporate sorting camp for an army, or cooking massive soups in the woods. They don't understand the complex politics of the war, viewing the human kingdoms through a lens of basic transactions and concrete rules. If a soldier breaks their rule, the troll will react with an immediate violence. This simple logic can transition from a peaceful alliance to a hyper-violent frenzy in a matter of seconds if the creature is confused or insulted. A traveller who laughs at a troll's speech or tries to cross its bridge without paying the primitive toll will quickly find themselves targeted by its massive fists. Their physical strength allows them to tear apart an ordinary militia squad, using their stone hides to deflect arrows and swords while they reduce their enemies to ingredients for their soup. The bestiary entry reveals that a troll's back is covered in dense rock plates that provide absolute immunity to standard physical attacks. A witcher who attempts a frontal assault will only damage his own silver blade against the mineral crust, forcing him to find a more sophisticated strategy. The combat requires the hunter to target the soft flesh of the underbelly or use high-speed positioning to score deep cuts along the limbs while the creature is recovering from a heavy swing. Geralt frequently chooses to act as a patient diplomat rather than an executioner when encountering these ogroids on the path. He recognizes that many trolls are entirely innocent of malicious intent, merely executing a task that they believe is helping the local community. He uses their childlike reasoning to negotiate a solution, solving the contract through conversation rather than blood. This approach saves his silver blade and preserves a unique part of the world's folklore. When a fight is unavoidable, such as an encounter with an aggressive ice troll in the Skellige caves, Geralt applies advanced ogroid oil and relies on the Quen shield. He uses the Quen sign to deflect their heavy boulder throws, closing the distance to execute a series of targeted strikes. The troll falls with a heavy thud, its stone hide turning back into simple rocks. Geralt leaves the cave with his coin, his mind fixed on the complex line that separates a monster from a simple neighbour. Part 35. Ice Giants. The Ice Giant is a mythic colossal ogroid that stands as a living testament to the unforgiving glacial landscape of the Skellige Isle of Undvik. This ancient entity feels less like a biological animal and more like a walking legend carved out of solid ice and permafrost. He is the last of his kind, a relic of a bygone age who has claimed the entire island as his private kingdom after driving out the clans. Unlike common ogroids that rely entirely on brute force, the Ice Giant possesses a cruel, manipulative intelligence that makes him a terrifying political force on the islands. He didn't just slaughter the population of Undvik, he systematically dismantled their society, software locking their borders by enslaving the local sirens to act as his early warning network. He uses the flying hybrids to monitor the coastlines, ensuring that any rescue expedition or hunting party is detected long before they reach his frozen borders. The physical presence of the giant has a direct corrupting effect on the local ecosystem, bringing a permanent winter to the valleys of the island. He collects the scrap iron and timber from abandoned Skellige longships, using the wreckage to construct a massive crude suit of protective armor that covers his vital organs. He moves through the empty stone villages like a cold ghost, his footsteps accompanied by the sound of grinding iron. Hunting this mythic entity requires the player to navigate a desolate, frozen ghost town, tracking his massive footprints through the snow and the ruins. Geralt must use his Witcher senses to locate the survivors of the original clans, building a tactical alliance with the remaining warriors to prepare for the final assault. The environment itself is an adversary, with the hypothermia and the deep drifts reducing his mobility. The final confrontation inside the giant's cavern is a heavy crystalline battle against a relic of history. The ice giant utilizes a massive iron anchor as a weapon, swinging the chain with a momentum that can smash through stone pillars. Geralt must use advanced ogroid oil on his silver sword and rely on the Quen shield to survive the wide sweeps. He uses the Igni sign to melt the ice armor, exposing the pale skin beneath the iron plates. The fall of the ice giant allows Clan and Crate to reclaim their ancestral home, restoring the island of Undvik to the map of the clans. Geralt picks up his trophy from the frozen floor, his body shivering from the intense cold of the cavern. He leaves the ghost town behind, knowing that he has put an end to a mythic tragedy. The giant is gone, but the ice remains, a permanent mark of the creature that once held the winter in his hands. Part 36, Leshens. The Leshen is an ancient, deeply atmospheric forest spirit, classified as a high-tier relic that predates human arrival on the continent, appearing as a towering, emaciated humanoid constructed out of living bark and ancient roots. The creature is crowned with a weathered deer skull that hides its features. It is the absolute master of its woodland territory, operating as an organic immune system that protects the deep woods from human industrial expansion. A Leshen rules its forest through a silent, menacing omnipresence that unhinges the sanity of any lumberjack or traveler who enters the trees. It doesn't hunt like an animal, using powerful relic magic to command the local wolf packs and summon swarms of flesh-ripping crows from the canopy. The ecosystem of the woods is completely subordinate to its will, with every root and branch acting as an extension of its physical presence on the path. The primary defense mechanism of the spirit is its ability to merge its physical form into the ancient trees, executing seamless short-range teleports during a fight. A Witcher who attempts to close the distance will frequently find his blade hitting nothing but empty bark, while the Leshen rematerializes behind his back to launch a heavy strike with its clawed root hands. This spatial mobility turns the deep woods into a claustrophobic trap. To handle a Leshen contract, Geralt must use his mutated senses to locate the hidden totems that anchor the spirit's energy to the grove. These totems are constructed out of bones, feathers, and carved wood, hidden within the dark corners of the forest. Destroying these shrines is the only way to weaken the creature's connection to the land, forcing its physical form to remain visible where the silver sword can reach its vital matrices. Alchemical preparation is vital for surviving an encounter with a forest spirit of this caliber. Geralt applies advanced relict oil to his weapon and relies heavily on the Igni sign to exploit the creature's botanical composition. Fire is highly effective against the living bark, igniting the roots and halting its ability to execute its teleportation cycles. The combat is a heavy atmospheric exchange, with the crows circling overhead while the silver blade cuts through the wood. The destruction of a Leshen returns a cold silence to the forest, but it leaves the surrounding village vulnerable to the wild. The spirit was a tyrant, but it kept the ghouls and the bandits out of the valley, an ecological balance that the common folk frequently forget. Geralt pockets his coin and leaves the trees, his cat eyes tracking the falling leaves. The master of the woods is dead, and the wilderness is a little emptier. Part 37, Ancient Leshens. When a forest spirit manages to survive for multiple centuries without being hunted, it transitions into an ancient Leshen. This elder-tier entity evolves from a simple woodland predator into a localized primitive pagan deity that commands the absolute devotion of the nearby human settlements. They don't hide from civilization, building a deeply transactional blood bond with the local villages that has maintained the region for generations. The ancient Leshen operates through a supernatural system of regional management that ensures the survival of its worshippers. As long as the villagers remain within the old boundaries and execute traditional blood-soaked animal sacrifices to honor the woods, the spirit grants the community abundant hunting harvests. It protects the settlement from human wars, using its wolf packs and crows to dismantle any passing army or tax collector who tries to cross the border. This arrangement creates a profound socio-political split within the human community when the modern world begins to close in. The younger villagers, influenced by the coin of the trading ports, want to slaughter the monster with modern iron to clear the woods for timber mills. The village elders, however, recognize that the creature is the only thing keeping their ancient culture alive, viewing the sacrifices as a small utility fee for their autonomy. Geralt is caught in an uncomfortable moral vice when he accepts a contract for an ancient lesson. He discovers that the spirit has marked a young village maiden as its anchor, tying her life force to its own continuous regeneration through a hidden curse. To kill the monster permanently, the Witcher must first exile or execute the innocent girl, a choice that strips the contract of any traditional concept of heroism. The combat with an ancient lesson is a heavy test of survival, as the elder spirit can summon massive roots from the earth to impale its targets from a distance. Geralt must use advanced relict oil and rely on dimeritium bombs to disrupt its ancient magic. He uses the Igni sign to ignite the dense moss that covers its deer skull, forcing the deity to face the physical reality of a silver blade in a burning grove. The resolution of the contract leaves the village divided and broken, regardless of the path chosen. If the spirit dies, the timber mills move in, but the old ways are permanently erased, and the village loses its protection against the war. Geralt rides away from the smoking grove with his gold, realizing that his silver sword has destroyed a god to satisfy the greed of a new era. The forest remains, but the magic has been cleared. Part 38. Fiends and Chorts. Fiends and their slightly smaller, hyper-agile cousins, Chorts, are massive horned relicts that represent absolute territorial dominance within the wilderness. A fiend is a colossal, quadrupedal beast featuring an array of heavy antlers, a muscular chassis, and a specialized third eye located in the center of its forehead. They inhabit the deep caves, foggy wetlands, and ancient forests of the continent, where they live as apex kings of the wild. The danger of a fiend stems from its unique combination of massive physical mass and hypnotic relic magic. They can charge through the thickest undergrowth at high speeds, using their antlers to smash through stone barricades and crush travelers before they can draw a weapon. Their hide is dense, capable of absorbing heavy physical trauma without slowing their momentum, requiring a Witcher to remain in a constant state of defensive motion. The primary tactical weapon of the fiend is the central third eye, which it opens during a hunt to emit a powerful hallucinogenic flash. This magical discharge completely unhinges a Witcher's vision, plunging his sight into absolute pitch-black darkness for several seconds. The hunter is left completely blind, guided only by the sound of breaking branches as the multi-ton beast charges through the dark to flatten him into the mud. To survive an assignment against a horned relict of this caliber, Geralt must use his alchemical bestiary knowledge to neutralize the third eye. He deploys the salmon bomb at the exact moment the central eyelid expands, using the flash of the explosion to temporarily blind the creature's magical vision and break the hypnosis. This tactic restores his sight before the antlers can make contact with his leather armor. Geralt applies advanced relict oil to his silver sword to ensure his strikes cut through the creature's thick muscle layers. He relies on the Quen shield to absorb the residual impact of their hoof strikes, using high-speed dodges to circle the beast and score deep cuts along its flanks. The combat is a mechanical struggle between the speed of the mutant and the brute force of a prehistoric predator. The contract concludes when the silver blade splits the fiend's throat, returning a natural balance to the wilderness. Geralt takes the horns and the third eye for his alchemical research, leaving the giant chassis in the woods. The common folk can return to the forest roots without fear of the shadow, but the deep caves remain dark, a permanent reminder that humanity's control over the continent ends where the relics begin. Part 39. Godlings. The Godling represents a rare non-violent class of relicts that serves as a beautiful counterweight to the bleak hostility of the Bestiary. Appearing as small, blue-skinned child-like entities with large golden eyes, these old beings are deeply bound to specific natural hideouts across the continent. They don't hunt for flesh or blood, inhabiting the hollowed-out trees of stagnant marshlands or the hidden crawl spaces beneath urban homes. A godling possesses low-level reality warping and illusion magic, which they use exclusively to execute playful pranks or to protect their chosen territory. They are naturally shy creatures that prefer to avoid direct contact with human adults, who frequently mistake their presence for a demonic manifestation or a malicious curse. They communicate through a series of high-pitched whistles and simple human speech, displaying an innocent curiosity about the world. These small relicts often establish a quiet coexistence with local human families, quietly assisting them with daily chores or guiding lost children out of the woods in exchange for small gifts or companionship. They view themselves as guardians of the hearth, their magic used to bring good fortune to a household that treats them with respect. They represent the possibility of harmony between the post-conjunction entities and human society. Geralt's personal code strictly forbids the execution of godlings, recognizing that they are entirely harmless spirits that pose zero threat to public safety. When a contract leads him to a house that is reportedly haunted by a noisy spirit, such as the assignment involving Sarah in Novigrad, the Witcher uses his intellect to identify the resident. He often negotiates a compromise, letting the godlings stay while finding a way to satisfy the landlord. This professional flexibility frequently clashes with the fanatical dogma of organizations like the Church of the Eternal Fire, who view any relict as an abomination to be cleared with the pyre. Geralt must act as a shield for these small spirits, hiding their presence from the Inquisitors to protect them from the public witch hunts. He understands that a world without godlings would be a significantly darker and colder place for the common folk. The little creature vanishes back into its crawl space with a laugh, leaving behind a home that stays clean and a Witcher who walks back onto the path without blood on his silver blade. The contract is resolved without a fight, proving that the Bestiary isn't just a list of targets to be slaughtered for gold. It's a record of a shared world where some monsters are just lonely children looking for a place to hide from the fire. Part 40, Dopplers, or Shapeshifters, introduce a profound ethical dilemma to the profession of monster hunting, challenging the fundamental definitions of monstrosity. These peaceful, highly intelligent relicts possess the absolute biological capability to alter their cellular structure, mass, and memory pathways at will. They can perfectly replicate any living being they encounter, down to the duplicate Dina level, matching their voice, skills, and internal thoughts with an absolute precision. A Doppler doesn't use this immense power to launch political assassinations or infiltrate royal courts for conquest, operating on a naturally non-violent philosophy. They use their transformations exclusively to escape persecution, blending seamlessly into human urban societies like Novigrad to survive. They adopt the identities of missing clerks, ordinary tailors, or petty thieves, using their duplicate lives to earn a simple living in the slums. The Bestiary reveals that Dopplers are completely incapable of executing acts of unprovoked violence, their instincts oriented entirely towards self-defense and mimicry. If forced into a confrontation, such as the encounter with Dudu or the rogue Doppler in the market, they will replicate the hunter's own appearance and skills to fight back as a literal mirror. The combat is a confusing exchange where the Witcher must fight his own reflection. Geralt's personal code strictly forbids the execution of shapeshifters, recognizing that the creature is merely trying to live in a world that hates anything that is different. He sees that the Doppler is not a predator of men, but a victim of a system that replaces understanding with execution grounds. The real horror of the contract is never the relict in the market. It's the intense human prejudice and religious extremism that hunts them down. The Church of the Eternal Fire views the Doppler as the ultimate abomination, preaching that a creature that can change its face is an insult to the divine order. The witch hunters use their specialized squads to track their scent, turning public squares into execution fires for anyone suspected of shifting their mass. Geralt must navigate this fanatical climate, often faking the death of the target to satisfy the contract while letting the relict escape. The shapeshifter disappears into the crowded streets of the city, its new face completely hidden beneath the noise of the market. Geralt pockets his coin with a quiet cynicism, realizing that his silver blade has no utility against the bigotry of the towns. The Doppler lives on as a shadow within the civilization of men, a reminder that the most terrifying monsters on the continent are often the ones who refuse to change their masks. Part 41. Bruxay and Alp, like vampires. Bruxay and Alps represent a high-tier class of intelligent post-conjunction vampires that seamlessly combine alluring physical beauty with terrifying predatory speed. They don't hunt like the lower beasts of the swamp, using the cover of abandoned ruins, ancient crypts, and high society estates to stalk their prey. They are sentient predators that view human blood not just as simple sustenance, but as a complex source of emotional and physical intoxication. A Bruxa appears as an elegant dark-haired human woman, a physical disguise that allows her to move through the edges of civilization without alerting the local militia. She utilizes an enchanting multi-tonal song to lull her victims into a catatonic state before she ever strikes, turning their sleep into a pleasant dream while she approaches the bed. This psychological manipulation ensures that her hunts are clean, quiet, and completely free of struggle. The moment her disguise drops in a fight, her true anatomy reveals a predator engineered for high-speed slaughter. Her jaw splits open to emit a devastating localized acoustic shockwave that can throw a fully armored witcher across a room, shattering his eardrums and breaking his concentration. She moves at velocities that render her completely invisible to the human eye, appearing as a white blur that flickers through the shadows. This extreme speed changes the fundamental rules of engagement for a witcher, rendering standard parries completely obsolete against her flanking rushes. Geralt must use specialized alchemical tools to force the vampire into a tangible, visible state during the exchange. He deploys moondust bombs to coat her skin in a silver residue that blocks her invisibility, and applies advanced vampire oil to his conductive blade to cut her tissue. The combat is a high-stakes dance, where the professional must rely on his black blood potion to turn his own veins into a toxic trap for the predator. When the Bruxa bites his neck, the mutated blood inflicts immediate internal burning upon her system, slowing her velocity and opening a gap for the silver sword. He uses the Yrden sign to anchor her movement, cutting through the elegant dress to reach the vital matrix of the vampire. The Bruxa falls with a final piercing scream, her beautiful disguise dissolving into a pile of grey ash and black fluid on the stone floor blocks. Geralt collects the fangs for his alchemical studies, his body weary from a duel that required the absolute limit of his mutated reflexes. The ruin returns to its cold silence, a monument to a predator that used the form of a woman to hide the hunger of an alien race. Part 42. Catechins and Echimaris. Catechins and Echimaris occupy the mid-tier category of lower vampires, functioning as night-stalking killers that have no desire to blend into human society. They don't wear the beautiful disguises of Bruxay, appearing as massive bat-like humanoids caked in coarse dark fur. They haunt the subterranean vaults, abandoned cellars, and sewer networks of large metropolises, where they can harvest the local population under the shroud of absolute darkness. The anatomy of a catechin is a physical manifestation of bloodlust, featuring long translucent talons and rows of hollow teeth engineered to siphon veins rapidly. They possess an incredibly advanced passive cellular regeneration capability that makes them highly resilient targets in a fight. Any physical lifestyle modifications or lacerations inflicted by a silver blade heal near instantly, the muscle tissue sealing itself over before the blood can hit the stone floor blocks. These lower vampires are driven by a permanent physiological addiction to alcohol-soaked or adrenaline-fueled human blood. A catechin will frequently nest beneath a high-density tavern or an illegal gambling den, tracking the vibrations of intoxicated patrons who stagger into the back alleys after midnight. They don't hunt out of a noble necessity, operating on the same level of predatory greed as a giant leech that has found a stable source of protein. The speed of an Echimara during an assault is a major hazard for any militia squad, as the creature can lunge out of the rafters to decapitate a soldier before an alarm can be sounded. They use their long talons to launch a flurry of horizontal slashes that can shred leather armor and cause rapid systemic internal bleeding. The combat inside a narrow cellar is a claustrophobic struggle where the hunter cannot afford to lose his footing. To halt their advanced healing loop, Geralt must deploy the Igni sign or utilize specialized firebombs like Dancing Star. Fire cauterizes the vampire's flesh, burning through the regenerative cells and preventing the tissue from sealing over during the exchange. He applies vampire oil to his silver sword to increase the depth of his cuts, using high-speed pirouettes to disable the creature's massive wings before closing the distance to reach the vitals. The carcass of the bat-like monster lies in the sewage, its coarse fur smouldering from the alchemical fire. Geralt collects the vampire blood and the talons for his potion brewing, his mind fixed on the mechanical efficiency of the execution. The city above remains completely oblivious to the predator that was nesting beneath their taverns, continuing its daily grind while the White Wolf climbs back out into the night rain. Part 43. Higher Vampires. Higher vampires represent the absolute pinnacle of evolutionary danger on the continent, existing completely outside the traditional laws of the Bestiary. These are not mutated humans, cursed victims, or lower animals driven by simple bloodlust, belonging instead to an ancient aristocratic alien race. They entered the world 1,500 years ago during the conjunction of the spheres, bringing with them a civilization and an intellect that transcends human understanding. A higher vampire can blend perfectly into human royal courts, historical academies, and high society salons without ever alerting the tracking mages or the witches' medallions. They do not need to consume human blood to survive, viewing the substance merely as an expensive wine that can induce a state of social relaxation or artistic inspiration. They possess full human speech, advanced emotional depth, and a longevity that makes them functional immortals. The magical capabilities of these ancient entities are absolute, including full mastery over mind control, physical transformation, and extra-dimensional teleportation magic. A higher vampire can transform its body into a giant bat-like predator or a cloud of dark vapor during a fight. Bypassing the physical constraints of the material plane, they are completely immune to traditional vampire weaknesses like garlic, holy water, or standard silver blades. The most terrifying aspect of the higher vampire is that they cannot be truly killed by a witcher or any mortal army. If Geralt manages to completely vaporize their physical form or reduce their chassis to a pile of cold ash, their core consciousness remains entirely intact. The tissue will slowly reconstruct itself over decades, drawing energy from the sphere until the vampire walks again. They can only be permanently executed by another member of their own species. This biological immunity turns any contract on a higher vampire into a profound philosophical and survival risk for a witcher. Geralt knows that a confrontation with an entity like Detlef or Regis is a battle against a god-like being that can dismantle an entire city like Beauclair in a single night of rage. He cannot approach them as a simple target, forced to act as a mediator between their ancient laws and the politics of men. The relationship between Geralt and Regis serves as a testament to the complexity of these intelligent entities. Regis is a person of immense integrity and medical knowledge, a scholar who has spent centuries studying the flaws of both human and vampire society. He provides the Witcher with a deep friendship that is free of the prejudice found in the northern towns. They share a drink at midnight, two long-lived outcasts discussing the metrics of a world that is too small for their secrets. Part 44. Golems and Gargoyles. Golems, earth elementals, and stone gargoyles are classified as elementa, entities that possess zero biological organs, evolutionary history, or independent souls. Instead, they are artificial constructs forged out of solid granite, marble, or raw clay by the hands of mages. They are brought to life through the complex telekinetic programming and automated script magic of high-level human or elven mages who required an absolute security system. Built to function as permanent, unbribable laboratory guardians and tomb security installations, an elemental moves with a mechanical deliberation that follows its original programming to the letter. It doesn't sleep, breathe, or feel pain, standing motionless in a dark vault for thousands of years until an intruder crosses the threshold. The moment the security loop is triggered, the stone chassis animates with a crushing physical force. An Elementa possesses absolute immunity to the common hazards of the Witcher's blade, including poison, bleeding effects, and psychological signs like axii. A hunter who attempts to bleed out a golem or stun its mind with an illusion, will find his magic completely useless against the solid granite structure. The creature doesn't possess a nervous system to disrupt, requiring a total reliance on raw physical kinetic damage to break the matrix. Gargoyles represent a specialized variation carved from stone to guard the high roofs and hidden laboratories of ancient mages. They possess a high bone-like density that can absorb heavy sword strikes, completed by the ability to hurl toxic stones or stomp through floor blocks to crush a target. Their movement is a clumsy but lethal display of automated weight, their stone wings allowing them to execute short hops to close the distance. To dismantle these artificial guardians, Geralt must prepare his heavy silver sword with specialized elemental oil, which contains alchemical compounds designed to degrade the binding magic within the stone. He relies heavily on the Quen shield to absorb the massive momentum of their fist strikes, and uses the Ard sign to crack the external granite layers. The combat is a noisy, grueling process of physical deconstruction, with the silver blade acting as a chisel. The golem deconstructs into a pile of simple rocks and blue magical residue, its ancient programming permanently terminated by the destruction of its core matrix. Geralt collects the elemental hearts and the infused dust for his high-level crafting, leaving the broken stone blocks in the ruins. The laboratory is open for exploration, but the victory is entirely devoid of emotional weight. The machine has stopped working, and the silent tomb returns to its natural rest. Part 45. Why Witcher monsters work. The legacy of the continent's bestiary is that its monsters are never deployed as simple, generic obstacles to be mindlessly slashed for experience points. Every creature is a carefully constructed narrative vessel, a physical and ecological expression of a world plagued by the horrors of wartime displacement, domestic grief, and human failure. The bestiary works because it treats its monsters as complex, tragic inhabitants of a shared ecosystem rather than cartoonish villains. A Noonwraith isn't a random phantom. She is the direct physical consequence of a domestic murder that the community tried to hide in the grain fields. A Botchling is the biological manifestation of familial shame and an unburied child, forcing the father to face his own cruelty in the light of the moon. The monsters are the symptoms of a human rot, turning the supernatural elements of the world into a mirror for the sins of civilization. The realistic pacing of the bestiary lore requires the player to operate as a scientist of the wild, separating the superstitions of the common folk from the hard data of biology. Geralt doesn't hunt out of a desire for heroic glory, analysing the claw depth and the venom sacs to find a practical solution to a regional hazard. This grounded approach turns the hunt into a job of environmental maintenance, a daily grime that requires patience and study. The moral grey area that defines the Witcher universe is maintained through the intelligence and sentience of specific entities like succubi, dopplers, and higher vampires. These characters complicate the Witcher's contract parameters, forcing him to balance his legal obligations against his personal code of honor. He must frequently defend the monster from the fanatical violence of organizations like the Church of the Eternal Fire, proving that the true abomination wears a robe. The bestiary represents the final alignment of biology, folklore, and human suffering across the landscape of the continent. It shows that the conjunction of the spheres didn't just introduce predators to the world. It created an environment where the choices of men have a physical reaction in the soil. The wilderness is dangerous because it remembers every crime, turning the deep woods and the swamps into active minefields of generational punishment. The final contract is fulfilled. The silver blade is returned to its scabbard, and the white-haired mutant rides out into the twilight of the path. He leaves behind a world that is still full of teeth, a continent where the balance between nature and civilization is constantly fought for at the edge of a sword. The bestiary remains his guide through the dark, a record of a shared reality where the ultimate hunt is always about unraveling the threads of human failure.